Laureate of Jamaica, and it is my privilege to welcome you to the inaugural Poet Laureate panel on dub/reggae poetry. This program is part of the celebration of International Reggae Month and Jamaica 60, which is a celebration, of course, of the 60th year of Jamaica's independence. And it's produced by the National Library of Jamaica, which is home of the Poet Laureate program. We're going to start with a special message from the Honorable Alando Carolin, Minister of State in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, who I know is a lover of both poetry and reggae.
Madam Chairman of the National Library of Jamaica, Mrs. Joy Douglas, our National Librarian, Miss Beverly Lashley, distinguished panelists, viewers and friends, my fellow poets, a good morning to you all. Our hero and iconic global superstar, the Honorable Robert Nesta Marley, once said, "One good thing about music, when it hits you, you feel no pain, and that's good." For me, one good thing about poetry is that when it hits you, you feel. You might feel pain, you might feel joy, you might feel anger, you might feel peace, you might feel erotic feelings. The beauty of poetry is that it can pack a punch or a fatherly caress. It is sometimes sensual, and it is sometimes fatherly endearment. Poetry is a key that unlocks and unravels feelings. It unravels ideas. It unravels us. Poetry is prayer, protest, pilgrimage. Poetry is performance, connection, reflection, projection, past, present, future. Poetry is all these things and so much more. As Minister with responsibility for the National Poet Laureate program, I am very pleased to share company with some of the great guardians of Jamaican poetry on today's Poet Laureate panel. Our own Poet Laureate, the esteemed Olive Senior, through her recently published anthology of pandemic poems, has helped to usher us throughout one of the hardest of times during the COVID-19 pandemic. As we continue to experience the throes of the COVID pandemic, we can turn to our creative geniuses. We can turn to our creatives. We can turn to art. We can turn to poetry. Oku Onuora, Linton Kwesi Johnson have become synonyms for Jamaican dub poetry. Globally, both men are pioneers, and we have come to appreciate their work as rhythm in evolution, their work as revolution, revolutionary rhythm, however it sits at the point in time. Professor Carolin Cooper has also been a staunch advocate for the valuing of the Jamaican language, that powerful vehicle through which the expressions of our poetry is powerfully projected. And Yoshika Graham, like her poem, Time Travel, embodies that shifting through time of Jamaican poetry. Our voices have been preserved, passed on, and will be projected into the future through poetry. Our great poets like Louise Bennett, another hero and treasure of Jamaica's culture, also rings through when we speak of poetry as a whole. I want to congratulate all our creatives, all our poets, and this morning I want to thank our National Librarian, Bev Lashley, and Chairman of the Board of the National Library of Jamaica, Miss Joy Douglas, for their commitment and vision in celebrating and curating this national treasure of dub reggae poetry. And finally, I want to wish you all the very best for today's program as you reflect on the past, immerse yourselves in the present, and cast renewed visions for the future of dub reggae poetry. Thank you all.
Thank you, Minister. This discussion is titled Dub/Reggae Poetry, and the difference between the two is one that we plan to tease out. But we will start with a discussion of dub poetry, an art form that originated nearly 50 years ago in Jamaica, fusing spoken poetry with reggae. Dub employs the Jamaican language, patois or dialect, and is strongly performative, sometimes using the voice only as an instrument. Most importantly, dub from the start has presented an anti-colonial and revolutionary challenge to authority, and its working class origins and the use of Jamaican patois was initially seen as separate from the literary culture, which was based on the written word that privileged print. From lowly origins, dub has become transnational, and as the term dub implies, is in constant process of renewing and reinventing itself. Today, apart from books and recordings, dub also crosses boundaries to embrace dance, theater, audiovisual and visual art, and digital technology. And although Dub Canada is not represented today, I can say it's very strong in that country, where much of this dance, theater, and so on reflects the origins of dub. By now we know the origin story. Dub became popular in the 70s with performance, books, and recordings by people like Oku Onuora and others in Jamaica, such as Micah Smith, Jean Linda Breeze, Tomlin Ellis, and Poets in Unity, and artists like Muta Baruka and Yasa Safari. In the UK, Linton Kwesi Johnson and Benjamin Zephaniah. And in Canada, Lillian Allen, who is one of the mothers of dub, and people like Clive Brooks, Oku Cooper, and Audrey Zena Mandela, to name a few. The genre quickly went from its status as lowbrow in the literary arts to its embrace and championship of dub performers by academics, such as, for instance, Professor Mervyn Morris, who was instrumental in getting some of the poets getting their work into print, and also for his scholarly discussion of dub, and dub as a serious art form. And over time, of course, there have been numerous books, anthologies, journals, and the latest journal, which has a special issue devoted to dub, is the Journal of West Indian Literature, which you all might want to check out. So we are just so absolutely privileged today to have a remarkable panel, including the two people who are regarded as the original revolutionary voices of dub. Oku Onuora in Jamaica, sitting in front of a beautiful mural at the National Gallery of Jamaica, and in London, Linton Kwesi Johnson. We also have the younger generation represented. I don't know if she calls herself a dub poet or not. We'll find out later. Yoshika Graham, who is one of the up-and-coming poets in Jamaica. And of course, we have Professor Carolin Cooper herself, who more than anybody has devoted her life to championing the oral culture in all its many, many forms. So welcome, thank you all for being here. This is just an amazing panel. We don't have much time, so without more ado, I'm gonna speak first to Oku, because Oku, you are widely acknowledged as the person who gave the name to the genre dub poet over 45 years, early 70s anyway. And your story is well known. You were in prison at the time, and you have talked about how you discovered poetry as an awesome weapon that could be used to fight the system, both inside the prison and out. And you started to write poems and read them to your fellow prisoners. What I would like is for you to take us back to that moment in time because I want to know at what point did you start to put your poetry to a reggae beat? Or was that always there from the start? And secondly, how did you come up with the name dub poetry? So Oku, over to you.
First and foremost, give thanks to be here. Poetry, prior to my writing poetry, I saw the weapon of communication. Communication was key. I started out with wall slogans and not really interested in literature in any kind of way. Although in school I loved comprehension, you know, and I would often be told that my piece was more like a short story. So I had a flair for creative writing from then. While I was in L, I started to do a correspondence course because what I really wanted to do was to become an investigative journalist to uncover the corruption and the ills of society, to give the voice of the people a channel. So I thought becoming a journalist would be the way to go. So I started a correspondence course with ICS, International Correspondence School, in Miami. This was long before parole. This was long before parole. And during the course of doing this online course, I started to write poetry. And initially, it was giving voice to the brothers in L, the brothers who didn't have a voice. It was recording not what was happening in L, but what was happening outside that led these men into prison, especially youths. So I would record the scene. I would record the voices of the brethren them in a L. And I would recite this poem to them, you know, a poem that I composed. And oftentimes when I came out of my cell, I was asked, is there anything new? And if I had something new, it would be a joy to actually recite to the brethren. And that's where my validation come from. Let me just quickly say, I don't need nobody, I don't need academia, I don't need literary society for validate what me do. So from them time, that's how I get the validation. Reggae rhythm has always been a part of my poetry. Unconsciously, I was influenced by the music, by people like Bob Marley, Burning Spear. I didn't go the route of Miss Lou. You know, so my early poets were people like Bob Marley, you know, reggae music. Henceforth, being influenced by that, my poetry was naturally imbued, you know, it has the rhythm. It has a rhythm thing in it from morning. In fact, a lot of people talk, when they talk about dub poetry, they see it as a spoken word thing, them kind of way there. But my work is really a literary thing. In fact, before I started to record, I was writing, I had published a collection of poems. A collection of poems were published. Professor Mervyn Morris, bless up Mervyn Morris didn't have any difficulty with my poems. There was no editing. He get a collection and, you know, we select what go on and we put it out there. As opposed to with Mikey Smith, for example, he had to work on it Because it's not every poem can stand up on paper or work on paper. My poetry works on paper. Okay, a whole heap of poets work on paper. Spoken word, oral poetry, but filming stand up on paper. From my written poem, one can hear the rhythm. In 1976, I submitted 3 poems via the literary competition, JCDC poetry competition thing. I entered 3 poems. Got 2 bronze medals and a certificate of merit. Why I mention this? 1976, at the end of the competition, the judges' report said, this is not black and white unless them expunge it, erase it. Because we know, say, them capable of it and them will do that. All right? In 1976, the judges' report, it read in part, Dread Times signaled a new trend in Jamaican poetry in that it introduced the reggae rhythm. Now this is from judges where I read, when you know me, where I read a poem pen paper can make a statement like that.
Oku,
Yes.
I don't want to cut you, but how did you come up, at what point did you decide what you were doing was dub poetry?
Okay, I was asked constantly, why do I shy away from being called a poet? Because we dub Shakespeare. We don't deal with Shakespeare. We're not degrading or underrating Shakespeare. Shakespeare is an awesome poet, but me know Shakespeare and Longfellow and Chaucer and them people. All right? So from beginning, the process, my process of writing and reciting is a dubbing process. Saying the whole thing is dubbing out unconsciousness and dubbing in consciousness. When we are right, we are dubbing rhythm in the poetry. Then we take that poem with the rhythm dub into it and we dub that for music. Dub poetry, for me, it's a dubbing process. Its base, its primary base is reggae dub. But a dub, we are dub. So we can do a jazz piece. We can do a Naya Bingi piece, which is not reggae, but Jamaican. We can do a piece with a hip-hop rhythm. We can do a piece with almost any kind of rhythm. We prefer to stay within our cultural sphere when it comes to rhythm-wise. Okay, so it's a process of dubbing. Henceforth, dub poetry. So I was constantly asked to describe what I was doing, and I would always say, Mervyn Morris can attest to this. It's a dubbing process. So, dub poetry, a dubbing process to me.
Thanks. That is an amazing description.
Yeah, and so I insisted that I be called be described as a dub poet, not be called, but described as a dub poet. Yeah. Me don't know about no movement, but me before you heard me say before they were just poets.
Okay. Oku, we could spend a whole day talking to you and one day we need to do that. But can you just recite one of your early poems for us? One of the poems from the very start.
Earth ablaze, man a rage. Man of living a shanty, food and clothes scanty. Cost of living gets so high. Man of shopping with him eye. But them your days not even rain won't fall from sky. Man broke, man won't walk. Man a fret, man don't know where the next meal a come from yet. Every ton man make trouble set. The whole scene red. Times dread.
Thank you. Sorry we have to move on, but we're moving over to London, England, where a young man of Jamaican background who went to England at the age of 11 was also inspired by reggae to create poems using the beat at around the same time. And he too saw poetry as a cultural weapon in the Black liberation struggle. Linton Kwesi Johnson really needs no introduction. From the time his poems were first published in the 1970s to now, he's become a global phenomenon. But I guess I want to again go back to the origin story. Linton, you have spoken about how you were writing poetry before you became identified as a dub poet. And I just wondered if you can tell us a bit about how the dub poetry came about. And at what point were you aware of or knew anything about the Jamaican poets and what was happening there in relation to dub?
Good afternoon, or good morning in Jamaica. I began writing verse when I discovered Black literature amongst the books that we had in the Black Panther movement. I was involved in the Black Power movement, discovered Black literature, read a book called The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. And that stirred something within me and made me want to express myself in verse. I knew nothing much about poetry. Most of the poetry we did at school didn't have make any impression on me. And at first I began to write in English. Most of my early poems were in English. And then after a while I felt that since I was writing about the experiences of the Caribbean community of Black people in England, I should be doing so in a language that everybody understood, the spoken language. And there were a number of things happening. I discovered poetry through some books that I was introduced to by my mentors, Andrew Salke, the Jamaican poet and broadcaster, novelist, and John LaRose, the Trinidadian publisher of New Beacon Books. And I was reading books by people like Chikaya Yotamsi, Christopher Okigbo. I found some African-American poetry by Gwendolyn Brooks, Langston Hughes, and people like that. Then I heard an album by Count Ozzy and the Mystical Revelation of Rastafari, with Ras being the drumming and spoken word together. And that left a deep impression on me. And then I was a reggae enthusiast when I was a youth. And the DJ thing was happening, you know. And I became a big fan of Big Youth and Daddy U-Roy and Prince Jazzbo and I-Roy. Also, I discovered that there was a thing in America called blues poetry and jazz poetry. And in the Black Panthers, I came across an album by the Last Poets who were using the everyday spoken language of African Americans as a vehicle for poetic discourse accompanied by percussion. And I said, yeah, I want to do something like that. So I began to write more in the Jamaican language and trying to incorporate the rhythms that I was hearing in reggae music. And but before I go on, I should also emphasize that not only was I a reggae enthusiast, I was a serious student of reggae music. And I was writing reviews of albums and concerts and so on, and I was looking for a term. a new vocabulary, if you like, to express what I felt about reggae music. And to me at the time, the most exciting thing that was happening in reggae was the art of the reggae DJs. And I came up with the term dub lyricism and also dub poetry as a way of describing the art of the reggae DJs. Of course, Oku was the first person to conceptualize oral poetry in Jamaica as dub poetry. I mean, I remember Oku talking about dubbing out the isms and schisms and dubbing in righteousness and all that. You know, but the term dub poetry, in the way I used it, was not to describe my work or Oku's work or Mikey's work, but to describe the work of the early reggae DJs. My first book was published in 1975, Dreadbeat and Blood. And it was around 1973 I began to incorporate reggae rhythms into my verses with poems like Dreadbeat and Blood, Five Nights of Bleeding and all of that. And of course, later on, I began to make records and had a career as a reggae artist. So naturally, I called myself a reggae poet. But, you know, I'm quite happy to be just simply called a Jamaican poet.
Thank you. I think that's a good place to pause. We're going to come back later because to talk more about some more recent stuff you've done. But this is a good way to move on to Professor Carolin Cooper, who, of course, is known for many things, but he is a pioneer academic, one has to say, in locating reggae music, including dancehall, into the academy as worthy of serious studies. She formed the Reggae Studies unit at UWI and introduced the course, the Reggae Poetry class, also at UWI. And above all, as I mentioned, she's been a champion of orality. And Carolyn, I'd love you to talk about the distinction between dub poetry and reggae poetry.
All right. The line is not, it's not a clear division between the two. When I introduced the course Reggae Poetry at University of West Indies, all I meant was studying song lyrics by reggae and dancehall songwriters. So for me, what they were doing was poetry. So that was just simple. You know the origins of lyrics. The word lyrics starts with the Greek word of the lyre, and the lyre, L-Y-R-E, not the lyre. The L-Y-R-E is, the instrument that was used to perform song, poetry as song. So it was a no-brainer that these songwriters had created lyrics, which in my opinion were very sophisticated and could be studied as literature. So for me, reggae poetry is simply poetry, songwriters creating beautiful lyrics, challenging lyrics. Now dub, I like the way that both Linton and Oku framed dub poetry as the rhythm, coming out of the music tradition. As Linton said, when he came up with, dub lyricism, he was really talking about the DJs, the old school DJs, as opposed to the dub poets as we think of them now. So I particularly like Linton's view of dub poetry that focuses both on the form and on the content, where he said it's dubbing out the pentameter, because, dub itself comes out of the music tradition, the drum and bass, where you drop in and take out and drop in and take out. It's an endless process of creativity. So you dub out the Eurocentric literary tradition, the pentameter, and you dub in the consciousness, as he put it, bringing consciousness into the people's heads. So you're bringing out an alternative perspective. So that dub poetry is both the method, the challenge of the Eurocentric literary tradition, but it is also what you're talking about, the revolutionary essence that is inspiring us to chart down systems of oppression.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the DJs who and the toasters and so on who seem to have spoken over the music, on top of the music. How does that differ from what you dub poets were doing? Or is it, I think you were doing something a bit different. Weren't you, Linton?
Can I come in here?
Yes.
I think the difference between the dub lyricists, that is the DJs, and the so-called dub poets or reggae poets, is that they begin with a piece of music. They begin with a rhythm, whereas we begin with the word. And from the word, from the structure of the language, out of the structure of the language comes the music. I think that's the essential difference. We begin with the word as opposed to the DJs who begin with the rhythm.
Yes, I think it's
Can I
important.
come in here, Miss O? I just want to reference Jean Binta Breeze because she has a wonderful poem, Dub Out, where she says, I search for words moving in their music, not broken by the beat. And that moving is both the words moving as well as the impact, the emotional impact. It reinforces the point that Linton just made, that the dub poets start with the word. Yes. So she's searching for the word that is not going to be broken by the beat, that the beat is now going to support the word. Yeah. That's the word is primary.
Thank you. We're going to come back to this discussion, but I want to bring Yashika on board because we want to hear from the new voices. And Yashika is making a name for herself as a poet in Jamaica. She's about to have her first book published called Directions from the Border. And I guess the first question I want to ask you, Yoshika, is how do you describe yourself? Are you a performance poet, a dub poet? But also I want to ask you about, to in a way speak to what is happening among young people in terms of poetry in Jamaica today, spoken word, and do you see yourselves as part of this tradition going back nearly half a century? Or are you conscious of forging a sort of more modernist approach? That's a whole lot of questions loaded in one, but let's hear from you, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. All right, beginning with what do I consider myself? I consider myself a poet, not necessarily a dub poet. In terms of where I see myself in sort of the, I guess, the spectrum between what's considered poetry and dub poetry, I find myself operating along that continuum. And that just like our navigation in Jamaica or in post-colonial spaces, you find yourself operating in the colonial as well as what is more rooted, what is more ancestral. So that language, the languages cross each other as the work is coming out. And I do see that in a lot of people's work. And in terms of my own history with poetry, I got an early introduction to dub poetry, but I also got an early introduction to other forms of poetry. So I think I have been shaped by all of those things kind of coming together. And what is key, though, for me is the beat that Oku and LKJ and Prof. Cooper have brought up. The beat has always been important. So while I see dub poetry as being defined by an explicit kind of beat, both in the language and in the inclusion of music, I do find that even if I don't use those things, meaning I don't have the drumming, the chanting is not necessarily performed in the same way, I do find that the language that I tend to use and operate in has that kind of musicality and rhythm. So I do want to say that for myself and for a lot of contemporary poets, dub poetry is there. It's like an undercurrent that is still operating, even if someone says they're not a dub poet, for example. So that rhythm and that beat, it's almost like the heart continues to push through and pulse through the poetry.
Yeah, it's marvelous. Are there any young poets calling themselves, insisting that they are dub poets? Do you know?
Yes, Oku mentioned Jawara Ellis, who is a significant dub poet. He's also an actor. So I think that the theater also fuses into the work that he does, and he also does music. So that's, yeah. And there is Richard Dingo Dingwall, who is, he released his book, I think, in 2019, A Window to Let the Light Out. And he, I think, began on stage initially, and a dedicated music enthusiast as well. So his performative work is really prominent, but then you see that the work also operates and survives really well on the page, just like you expressed about your own work. Who else can I think about? Yeah, I mean, Debbie Young, Anita Stewart's daughter, yes, Canada. She also fuses theater and dub poetry and music, and that is, I mean, she grew up on the stage with Anita Stewart, so you can imagine that she has that rich grounding in dub poetry. And she has created hybrid forms as she has continued to develop her work, but you hear the distinct dub still operating there.
Yeah. Thanks, that's excellent. And we need to hear from you, Yashika. So I'm gonna ask you if you would share some of your poems with us.
Thank you so much. All right, so this first poem is called Time Travel. Today I put a piece of dry coconut and ripe banana together. And I taste my granny yard, taste fruit I can't recall, taste the rhythm of being young and full of ramping. And I wonder where the years have gone. Wandered out of the city, into the boardhouse in the bush, and re-entered me at 8. And to think how I longed to be big and tall and out of parental ordering, longed not to be deemed fresh and feisty by misunderstanding, and how now, close to 30, with new eyes petitioning my knees, I long for that place, shifting through time. This is taking stock. To buck a bull on your way from spring is to become strategist. It is to approach, Lord God me dead, to swing your water jug, to reel, to run. It is to sit on a rock, taking stock, your brothers leaning on a guava limb, half laugh, half cry, saying, give thanks, is enough things to survive. Berkshire Road, coordinates unknown. They do not call the place Puss Hole like the people do, but a government name. A through road clogged with shops and gravel passes, leading to zinc roof illusions amid the trees. They do not call it an avenue, not a way, but a gorge in the hill where yards rife with sharp rock grow concrete verandas on board flats and haul brown tarp over their faces. When Berkshire makes the news, it is set in Bethel Town, 9 miles south of itself, where a woman can be 44 and also 48, her name, Grace. They say her son was quiet, didn't mention his name, showed a photo of her older child, graduation day. The newsman dodging dogs and tree limbs wants to know where he is. He writes what the welcome sign says and sets the clamoring scene closer to coast. He says Grace of the Green Hills lived in a town, maybe with sidewalks, a police station, names for its streets. Not up there, round so, not here. The crowd converged on the main, wants to know why a son, 13 years in the afterbirth, would summon his mother's blood again, rinse the knife, and in the middle road, blame his hand on the dark night. Thank you.
That's it?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And wow. So it's good to know poetry is alive and well in Jamaica. I don't know, Oku, what you would say to that. How do you feel about what's taking place among young people and poetry in Jamaica today?
what do I feel about it, or how do I feel about it? I'm excited, very, very excited, to see the tradition of poetry, whether it be spoken word, dub poetry, jazz poetry, dancehall poetry, because I say this phrase been used, some poets are using to describe what they are doing. So I'm excited, you know, people like Jawawa, people like Mika Nayota, people like Wise Words, Richie Innocent. There's a, you know, it's happening. Mostly recording. There's not much publishing taking place. Give thanks, I'm seeing some more publishing, like Jawawa published a collection of poems a little while back. Mika Nayota also, awesome collection of poems, from both young artists, young poet, you know. So it's encouraging. And we say generation link, you know. It's a generation link, so it's great.
Opportunity like yard theatre and zinc fence and those things from the 70s that afforded the opportunity for, you know, for people to gather for spoken word. But I think it will come back. I'm going to go over back to Linton, because you know, I think you're one. I mean, I know that as a writer, one of the things that sort of disturbs me sometimes is that people fix you into a mold. They act as if where you started is where you are 40 years later. That you don't change as a person, that your art doesn't change, and so on. And I know that this is one of the things you have resisted. Jean Winterbreeze and others have said, you know, being described as a dub poet sort of fixes you into a very narrow category. Whereas someone like you have have burst the boundaries beyond, not only as a performer, you have your own record label, so you're a businessman, and so on, but you have also gained increasing recognition for your published work, including in 2002, you were the second living poet and the first Black poet to be included in the Penguin Modern Classics series, and you have been awarded the Penn Pinter Prize, which celebrates literature and freedom of expression, among your many, many international honors and awards, including honorary doctorates, the latest one from the University of the West Indies. So you have expressed ambivalence about labels and labeling, so much so that you did do a recording a cappella live to, you know, where it's just you, I think, and the mic. So I wonder if you would read us or speak us one of your a cappella poems, but also maybe talk a little about where you stand today, how you would like to be perceived, how do you sum up all your, you know, if you could package all your achievements and describe who you are.
I would like my work to be located in Caribbean literature because I see myself as a Jamaican poet, someone working with it. Because at the end of the day, poetry is about language and how you use language creatively. And that's what I've been doing, writing Jamaican verse over the years. I just wanted to say that Mervyn Morris had a hand in nurturing my generation, Oku's generation of so-called dub poets. He had a hand in it, and he brought us all together. And when I discovered the work of Oku Onuora and Mikey Smith and Jean Winterbreeze and Mota Baruch and all these people, that gave me all the validation that I needed. That gave me a sense that I was on the right track. People in Jamaica doing the same thing or doing something similar. And so I've never needed any other form of validation apart from that. It's interesting that you should ask me to do one of my a cappella poems because I don't know what you mean by a cappella poem because this one is in a book. So,
But you have a record.
does that qualify? Does that qualify as a cappella?
If we're going to talk it, yeah. Without
This is a poem I wrote for my mother, which again goes to show you that the so-called you can't put so-called reggae poetry or dub poetry into any. It has to be political. It has to be anti-establishment or this or that. It has a whole range of emotions and themes and so on that can be dealt with. So this is a poem I wrote for my mother, who sadly passed away in 2020. And I called it Good Night to begin with, but then I changed it to Reggae for Mama because I have a poem called Reggae for Dad, so just to balance things out. You know? And I was thinking not just about my mother, but I was also thinking about our sister, Jean Winterbreeze, when I wrote this poem. So, Reggae for Mama or Good Night. Sit down on veranda in your wheelchair. Shame a lady now growing at your gate. Your daughter them bathe and powder you, put you in a nappy like baby. Children are run up and down out the road. Them laughter is music in your ears. You is a big girl now in Sandy River, bathing under rose apple tree. Sit down on veranda in your wheelchair, in the calming evening atmosphere. No heaviness of heart, no worrying thought, just a peaceful feeling deep within. Flowers in your garden please your eye, a ripe Julie mango drop a ground. Bird pan light post a sing a late song, you will wonder what tomorrow will bring. Sit down on veranda in your wheelchair, thankful for the little cool breeze. Arthritis make your bone them betray you. No bitter taste linger upon your tongue. Battalions of cloud marching yonder. The weary sun soon gone to bed. Light of faith fast in the twilight. Time a draw near for say good night.
Well, it's a nice match for Reggae for Dada, which is probably one of your most famous poems now. Well, certainly in Jamaica.
Let me have one for Mama now too. So.
Have one for Mama.
Well, that's all.
Thank you, Linton. We don't have much time left, so I'm going to go to Carolyn, and we'll end with Oku. I have a question for him. But Carolyn, do you want to make some general comments about where we are today after, 50 years of reggae music, the poetry, the everything? How do you see, where do we stand today, and where are we going? Can you sort of kind of sum that up for us? That's very broad, but I know you think about these things.
Where we're going from strength to strength because of one same way. Because activity in Jamaica is never ending. I tell you, a few years ago, before I graduated from the University of West Indies, I say emancipated from the plantation, or aka retired. I taught a course on Linton Kwesi Johnson, just a special author research course. I know one of the most touching things one of the students said is, Miss, how will I know about this man? How is no way of finding out about it? The man wicked, you know? And I think where we need to go in the future is for us to ensure that this generation knows what the earlier generations created. Because a lot of young people don't really know, and you can't blame them. In that same reggae poetry course that I taught, one of the students discovered Peter Tosh in the course, when of course the rest of his classmates carry on embarrassing. So what you did there, why you don't know about Peter Tosh? But the student genuinely didn't know about Tosh. So instead of thinking that the young people backward and them only backward as in the sense of looking backward as in sense not insufficiently conscious. Instead of blaming them for where they are, we need to recognize as elders that it is our responsibility to make sure that the young people know. What are radio stations doing? How many radio stations are playing Oku's work or Linton's work or any of the other foundation people, you know? So we can't just be looking at what is here now. We constantly have to be looking at the past because that is going to enrich the future.
Yeah, thank you. And I really like the whole idea of looking at culture in a holistic way. You know, we tend to sort of see culture in very narrow categories. And we still have this hierarchical way of looking at high culture, low culture, some is better than others. Yes, I do.
Across rather than up and down.
That's right, yes. And I want to thank you and people like you for helping in that process. And Linton.
I'd like to say that quite a bit of the dub poetry I'm hearing nowadays is there's too much of an emphasis on posturing and over-performance and image and contrivance and all that, and not enough craft. Some of these new generation of dub poets should take a little time out and maybe read a few books.
And it's an image is not imagery. Image is appearance.
Right. You always are correct me.
No. I just added a little layer to say you're a good point to make about the image. But in fact, because they're so concerned about looks, they're not focusing on the crafting, which would be the imagery.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah. Okay, I want to end up. I mean, I wish we could continue talking all day.
Part two.
I think this has been very enriching, you know, and it's been just wonderful to have this panel here. Oku, I'm going to end with question 2, where you started out. You've talked about wanting to change the system from the beginning, and you have been a cultural warrior all this time. Where do you stand today? Do you have the same passion that you had at the beginning when you started out? And the other thing is, I wanted to, quite a few of the dub poets are Rastas, and I wanted to ask you about Rasta influence. We know the influence on reggae music, especially the origins, but I also wanted to ask you about the Rasta influence on shaping your work, the poetry, and your worldview. Could you talk a little about those things?
While some poets write dub poetry sometimes, I dub poetry every time. Without any apology, dub poetry. When you say dub poetry, to say that dub poetry put in a narrow box is to say, it shows that one don't understand fully the concept of dub poetry. Me say it's a process of dubbing. We talk about a cappella poem. On my debut album, there are 3 poems without music. This is what you call an a cappella poem, poetry without music, or in the music sphere, poetry without music. You call it a cappella, something that you would record with music, and then you would go and you would perform it or present it without music. So for my debut album, from Jump Street, Pressure Drop, I have 3 poems without music, okay? There's a jazz poem called Thinking, a jazz piece. If you play it in a jazz program without saying, well, this is a poem from a Jamaican artist, you would not know. In fact, we did Angoulême Jazz Festival in France because of that jazz poem, Thinking, okay? So the diversity that dub poetry gives to the poet is awesome. Can't be no box business. You understand? It's a process of dubbing. Okay? I have a poem called Change Yes Change on my debut album. Because on my debut album, vinyl was the order of the day. Side 1, strictly reggae. All original rhythm. Because we don't deal with Dover rhythm. You understand me? We don't ride with him. Saying, side 2, we had a jazz piece, Thinking. We had Change, yes, Change was like a hip-hop piece. We have beat your drums, Naya Bingi. Okay? We have decolonization done to a djembe drum rhythm. So how can dub poetry be limited, be in a box? Can't be. So this is why I dub. Where I am, from them time till now, of a poem, and I use the hashtag. I use it as a hashtag. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Yeah? No change. No change. Are the same thing. My influence, Rastafari influence, came via Negos and the Rastafari movement involved in the socio-political struggle at the time. In the 70s, we had the Black Panther Party, the whole Pan-African movement was taking place. This is where I come from. This is the input of Rastafari. It was through Rastafari that I became aware of the anti-colonial movement. Okay? So when I mention wall slogan, because what I am doing, what I am saying today is the same thing, because the struggle continues. Saying the struggle continues. Professor Carolin Cooper have a thing called a course, Reggae, Sit Another, right? But she don't mention dub poetry, or she don't feature dub poetry, which is very prominent, because dub poetry wide, with people. In fact, Linton, when he really see himself as a dub poet, originally he was described as a reggae poet. Okay? From Jump Street, we said dub poetry. From Jump Street, we said dub poetry. I resist a whole heap of things. I resist enough things. Down to awards. People want to give me Lifetime Achievement Award. And me never reply to them invitation. You understand me? Because I say from morning, academia, the literary circle, the system, literature, poetry is used. You understand me? I deal with. So in the past, them try to write people like I out. But guess what? They can't write I out because a dub will come for dub. See? And dub poetry, as is today, is flourishing. Linton talk about, taking, some dub poets, the image and them kind of sitting there. But most ones, them accept the term dub poetry, or them use the term dub poetry because them see it as a way of getting recognition. I will always be a dub poet because I'll always be dubbing. And the versatility of the versatility that dub poetry gives a poet. Look on it. People from Jamaica will record and chant poetry and all. Them see the dub poetry. Awesome, isn't it? So when The Guardian, for example, write about poetry and they write about Linton Kwesi, them describe him as a dub poet to show you how powerful the concept is. Where, the Oxford Dictionary have dub poetry. The Oxford Dictionary. You understand me? I deal with this is to show you the power of dub poetry. But then again, we are going to show the hypocrisy. They have a new category called dub poetry. For years now, over a decade, I've never been invited once to participate in a workshop. Every year they have a workshop. Never. You understand? When the whole thing about dub poetry come up, I am hardly mentioned. Them sidestep way and them go around and all them thing there. But we know where I go on. I need not eyes to see them. I sense them from a distance. Beyond earshot, I hear them loud and clear. I see them for what they are, shapeshifters, forked tongues, apps running in the background. Shoo. Bless up.
Bless up. Oku, we know what to go on this panel.
So Miss Ali.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you.
Oku, you're not my book, so you can't send me this you.
No, we're not talking about this, you know. We're not talking about this, you know, but, you know, we know what go on, you know. We know what go on. Because poetry, literature.
Poetry without talk about you.
No, man, that me I say. I say it all the while. I mean, if you talk about Jamaican poetry, them talk about dub poetry 100 years from now. If you don't mention Oku Onuora, guess what? The thing not complete. And we are still functioning. We are still functioning. When I say still functioning, I have an album that came out in 2019 called I Have Seen, the title track for the poem I Have Seen. Awesome. And we not drop off a shape. If we not do nothing well, we write well. We know that. You understand? We are wordsmith, we are word warrior.
Your definition of dub poetry broad, you know.
Yeah.
Can I just say something? I just wanted to say that Mervyn Morris describes all of us so-called dub poets, reggae poets, as performance poets. I don't know if he meant that in a pejorative sense.
No, man, that was positive.
But I would like to take this opportunity, and Oku would join me in this, I'm sure, to thank Mervyn.
Most definitely. In fact, Mervyn Morris, because when we talk about academia and them thing there, you know, people feel some fight against academia. No, Mervyn Morris. I mean, like, out of all of them, when we say Mervyn Morris is true to the cause, we're not talking about dub poetry, but to poetry. Jamaican poetry. And we have to give thanks to Mervyn. Definitely give thanks. You know, Mervyn are one of the men, anything the poet them have. Mervyn will walk through bush and go support it. So Mervyn Morris has been supporting Jamaican poetry from them time there till now. And we give thanks to that. Bless her.
I endorse that as well.
Not just the dub poets. People like me,
Me.
a lot of the writers of my generation also benefited from Mervyn's counsel and support and so on. So yeah.
So we dedicate this panel to Mervyn.
Yes. Thank you, Prof. Morris.
He had a birthday recently.
Yes.
But anyway, folks, listen, we could go on all day. We're going to have panel number 2 because I have found this so exciting and interesting. It's just getting hot with all the, you know.
Yes, it just get hot because, you know, the thing are fly and rapid. Oliver, you're a brave woman, you know. Oliver, you're a brave woman. If you invite me on the panel.
What did he say?
I said you are a brave woman to invite me on this panel.
Yes.
Yes, you are. Because me I say, enough time them try to step round me and go round, but guess what? A flow we a flow. And see for me a flow, nothing can stop you. You understand where you go round, you go under, you go above. Say you're a brave woman. And thank you very much.
We have to come to the end of this. And I have to thank a number of people. Thanks to Minister Orlando Carolin, to our panelists, Linton Kwesi Johnson, Oku Onuora, Professor Carolin Cooper, Yoshika Graham. We want to thank the National Library of Jamaica, and especially the Special Programs Officer, Rowan Green, for herding us like cats. You know, they say getting poets and writers together is like herding cats. Well, this is how this was. But the National Library got us together. Thanks to the National Gallery for producing and hosting us and providing the backdrop. And finally, to you, our viewers, thank you so much for listening. Let's dub it out.
Love that.
No, no, no.